Hello and welcome to Thursday's live election update from MMG with Tom Grant, Pippa Dennis and Lucy Nichols.
So far, the statistics from the Students' Union are as follows. 10.2% of the university has voted in the SU elections so far, which equals 4,113 voters. 12.6% of all students have then voted in the referendum. Up to now, 28,500 votes have been cast, which makes up 14.4% of the student population, which is much higher when compared to last year's statistics. On average, 4.9 positions have been voted for by each voter, and 14.4% of all students have now voted in some form in these elections.
In the voting race, Manchester Labour students and LGBTQ Society are at the top of the leaderboard for societies, with the School of Arts, Languages and Cultures as the highest school. The School of Law has moved above the School of Social Sciences into second place. Denmark Road have held on to first place in the Halls race, whilst Richmond Park have moved from third to second place. Burkhardt House are now in third place after knocking George Kenyon out of the top three.
Currently, undergraduate first-year students make up 28.4% of the vote, whilst undergraduate final years make up 17.8%. Postgraduates make up 11% of all those who have voted so far, whilst the amount of undergraduates who have voted makes up 83%. UK students currently make up 69% of all students that have currently voted.
The following societies have also endorsed certain candidates. The Humanitarian and Conflict Response Institute Society voted to endorse the following candidates in the upcoming elections: Ben McGowan for GenSec, Fritha Heaven for Welfare, Oscar Thorpe for Activities, Jazz Taylor for Women's, Kieran Brearley for Liberation, and they also endorsed the Vote Yes campaign in the No Confidence referendum. The Nigerian Society Committee is also endorsing Melody Stephen for General Secretary of the Students' Union.
The Econ Society is endorsing the following candidates: Lamis Anjum for Welfare and Community Officer, Kavya Papasetti for International Officer, Oscar Thorpe for Activities and Development Officer, and Melody Stephen for General Secretary.
Those are all your statistics for today. MMG, so us, we've spoken with Riddhi Viswanathan, a former exec officer, NUS officer, and a university trustee, to hear her thoughts on the vote of no confidence and the Nancy Out campaign.
I think it's a frustration. I mean, if I have to put myself as a student, having to study during this pandemic, I don't know, I might have joined the campaign, I might not have joined the campaign, I'm not sure, but I do think students have every right to be angry for the university's mistakes. But I just don't agree with the fact that the approach that they have taken to counter this problem is right. All their demands, in fact, asking for a diverse and inclusive senior leadership team or board of governors, I 100% support it. But that there are procedures, there are laws, there are guidebooks, and everything happens over time. Time heals. But choosing this shortcut approach of voting Nancy Out campaign, I think only triggers a number of more problems than resolving any of them, because sitting people around the table and explaining the situation, in my experience as a representative, has brought fruitful results than a campaign to vote someone out or a retaliation campaign.
So, Riddhi shared her overall thoughts there on why students have chosen to uphold a vote of no confidence and her opinions on the campaign. I'm going to bring you two guys in now at the minute. I'll go to Lucy first. What do you think of what Riddhi's kind of made of the campaign? I mean, she commented on the fact that she would maybe get involved, but like if she was still a student, but what do you think about that?
I think we have to take into account that she's already graduated. She's not studying as we are at the minute. She's not experienced what we've experienced in September. And even if she had, she said maybe she'd get involved. So I think she sort of admitted to herself and to us there that she doesn't really understand the situation. She can't really sympathise with students that are currently in this situation. So her sort of opinion on it isn't necessarily as valid as I think necessarily everyone else's or current students would be. And then she went on to say that this isn't necessarily how we should, demand, or how students should sort of demand better from the university. But I think students have been trying to demand better from the university from the get-go in September. We've seen all sorts of protests and occupation, We've seen a rent strike that's been carried out for 2 semesters now. I suppose this vote to get Nancy out and to get the senior management team out is probably a bit of a last resort. So I think perhaps she's a bit misguided in thinking that this is sort of we're all going all guns blazing into getting Nancy Rothwell out when we've sort of exhausted every other opportunity we have to get justice and accountability for students, really.
Thanks for that, Lucy. I mean, Pippa, do you agree with Lucy on that, or do you kind of side with Riddy in her argument about this?
Yeah, I think it's interesting what Riddy says about it being a shortcut. I think it's important to remember that getting Nancy out isn't necessarily a magic fix for the problems that the university is having, and it shouldn't be treated as such. So it'll be interesting to see what happens when the voting comes out.
Yeah, obviously waiting for that tomorrow. That's just a reminder there from Pippa. You have got until 5 o'clock tonight to vote. So those are Riddy's thoughts on the campaign. Now in this next clip, Riddy discusses the positive experience she had working with Nancy Rothwell and the senior leadership team.
For me, it had been a very supportive experience, in fact, for all the campaigns. In fact, I'd like to quote a very specific one, which was around reducing fees for international students for their placement year, which at that time wasn't necessary because we were getting enormous applications, regardless of whether the fee was reduced or not. But taking students' interests into consideration, reducing the fee, and having the overwhelming support of the senior leadership team meant a lot to me. And I do know that the members of the team, some of them have retired and gone past, but for me, it had been, I didn't think there was any conflict between me and the senior leadership team, specifically in relation to my role.
So, I mean, there, Riddy's picked up on the fact, something that I was going to mention, I think, to both of you, is the fact that, yes, the leadership team has changed over the last few years, and it inevitably will change over time. It's going to happen, people come in and out of jobs. But I think I'll go to Pippa for this one first. What do you think about her comments there? Because she did say she had a positive experience working with Nancy Rothwell. But like she did then comment, she almost backtracked on it as if to be like, but the senior leadership team were different.
Yeah, I think it's good that Nancy's getting some kind of positive press because obviously they have done some good things for the university and that's important to note. But I think there's been a lot of bad and a lot of changes. And I do sort of agree with what Lucy said after the last clip that maybe they've not done enough in the time they've been given and it can't really be excused.
Yeah, I mean, Lucy, what do you think on this one?
I think it's all very well to say that you had a lovely experience with Nancy Rothwell back when you were an exec officer a couple of years ago or last year or something. But that's maybe not the case now. The 40,000 students at this university, the vast majority have probably never met Nancy Rothwell, probably don't even know her name, but won't have had the best year directly because of decisions that Nancy Rothwell and the senior management team have met. So it's all very well to say that Nancy Rothwell's on a personal level very nice and is friendly and stuff. But her decisions aren't friendly and they're not nice, and they've made people this year suffer and have led to all sorts of problems for all sorts of students, ranging from the fresher undergrad to a international postgrad. So I don't think perhaps Riddy's views necessarily reflect everyone else's. Although that being said, it is good to hear that Nancy Rothwell is nice on a personal level, even if she's not necessarily nice at any other level.
I take both of your points into consideration, I'd say, because Lucy, you said that she's not got the level of students, but not potentially all students. Some students might not feel the same way about Nancy Rothwell. About Nancy Rothwell as a lot of other students do. Everyone has their own opinion on different people. So I do take both your points into consideration there. And you are right, it's nice to actually see some positive news for Nancy, because unfortunately she has been, her name has been unfortunately tarnished through the media the last couple of months. So some people have said that they felt the focus on Nancy Rothwell receiving all the criticism has been unfair. Riddy discusses this in our next clip.
Having worked with Nancy personally over 2 years, I think she's very much a leader who faces all the backlashes, but makes her team take the credit for a number of things. I've observed this on a personal level. And I'm sure she's publicly apologized for some mishappenings at the universities, that even when we were a part of the executive team, there were some rifts, and she's publicly apologized for any of the mistakes on behalf of the management. And I don't know exactly what stance I would have, because, you know, when you are a figurehead, or when you are a leader, or when you are a representative who's a public figure, you know, criticisms and praises go hand in hand, isn't it? So maybe it's something that I've not had a chance to interact with her. Maybe I'd like to know how she feels being the first vice chancellor, in fact, to be, you know, having to face this vote of no confidence.
So I mean, really picked up on that, something that's, you know, factually correct. This is the first time in the university's history that that the vice chancellor is potentially going to get voted out by the student body. And she also commented on the fact that when you're in that position, you do get criticism. If you're in a position that people look up to and see, you know, if you're the head of the university, you are the first person that people is going to go to if something goes wrong. So, I mean, I think I'll come to you first, Lucy. Is it right that because we now think that this has gone wrong because of her, we then revolt and protest? Is that the right way to go? Does that mean, is it just going to happen again and again?
I think facing criticism because you're in a powerful role is not the same as facing criticism because you're bad at your job or you've made all these mistakes. And I think we should be looking at Nancy Rothwell. She is the one making the mistakes, as well as her senior management team. You know, really just said that Nancy Rothwell makes a lot of the decisions and often sort of delegates roles to other people in the university. And, you know, she is accountable. And again, Rudy said that Nancy Rothwell has had to apologise publicly for a lot of things and is happy to do so. That's not a good thing. You know, just because you're happy to take accountability doesn't make you innocent, doesn't make you, you know, completely absolved of all guilt. And I think we're doing a lot of already is maybe doing a lot of skirting around the issues, or maybe making Nancy Rothwell seem as she's happy to hold her hand up and admit that she's made a mistake. But what happens when, you know, we don't want our Vice Chancellor to make these mistakes in the first place? We don't want our Vice Chancellor to, for example, lie about having contacted a student who was subject to racial abuse. You know, we shouldn't be having to make these arguments. We shouldn't be having to say, okay, well, you've made this mistake, now apologise. She shouldn't be making the mistakes in the first place, really.
Yeah, I mean, you picked up on a point there, which was correct. You know, the racial profiling last semester did end up becoming, you know, Nancy Rothwell said she'd written to him, and that unfortunately was, you know, factually incorrect, and that turned out to be a lie. So I think I'm going to go to Pip with this one. I mean, Lucy picked up on it there. She's the head of the university, so she decides what other things go on. Could it just be the potential fact that those that she's picked now aren't doing their roles correctly, or, you know, aren't going to the full lengths that they could in this position? Whereas if she maybe chopped and changed, it could work better, but she could still maintain her job.
Yeah, so I can appreciate that maybe she is sort of a figurehead bearing the brunt for everything. She's the person that's in the public eye, so she's taking all the responsibility. But as Lucy said with the Newsnight situation, I mean, her actions speak for themselves. Like, there's only so much that she's covering up. Like, the stuff that she is doing publicly is pretty bad. The lying on Newsnight was very bad. And yeah, that's all I can say, really.
Yeah. So going to something else, the university's former General Secretary Alex Taylor wrote a piece for the Mancunian, our newspaper, in support of Dame Nancy Rothwell, said that electing officers that represent student views is the best way to be heard by the union. In this clip, Riddy agrees.
I agree with him 100%. I think student representatives are elected for a reason. And, you know, by having campaigns is just curtailing the voice of those student representatives, because students who are not involved in day-to-day contact with the senior management have no clue of what's going on the other side. So sometimes there is a lot of misinterpretation and miscommunication, because of which sometimes the demands are irrational on both the ends, not just on one end. So that way, I do agree with Alex's statement 100%. It should be the union representatives negotiating with the senior leadership team, and I don't see why. And students need to kind of hold their representatives to account, not interfere into university politics. That's my stand.
So Riddy picked up, and I think we just lost connection with Pippa there, so I'll just talk to you, Luce, about this one. Riddy picked up on there the fact that the student body, so the student elect, sorry, so the executive students should be talking to Nancy and deal with that in themselves. But I can't help question the fact that if it's got to this point, surely something along that lines hasn't gone correctly. So if we're now at the point where other students feel the need to launch a campaign and protest, there must have been somewhere on the line that they've lost touch with the exec team who would then speak to Nancy.
I mean, yeah, I think as we sort of have seen over and over again at this university, it's been last resort measures that students have had to take, because even the student union can't get through to senior management. You know, the occupation of Owens Park Tower was a very, very last resort, because the rent strike, even though they'd, 100 students withheld their rent from the university, wasn't getting anywhere. And I suppose this vote is a similar sort of thing. Students have tried time and time again to have accountability from the senior management team. We've gone through the students' union, who have tried, whether or not they've tried their best is a whole other issue, but they've tried to sort of reason with senior management, to have various demands of various student campaign groups listened to, and it just hasn't worked. So it's all very well to hear from two former SU executive officers who aren't students and haven't been since September talk about how lovely their time with Nancy Rothwell was, and how in a different era it was so much easier to listen to senior management teams. But it's not the same this year. We're not having that same level of communication at all.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy, for that. And Pippa, and we've got you back now. Hope you can hear me. I was just saying to Lucy about how surely if we've gotten to this point now that the student body are having to react to this kind in such a big manner with a campaign, something's been lost along the lines with the student exec team and the students who then speak to Nancy Rothwell. Oh, we've lost Pippa again. Oh, well, right, we'll go to the next clip. Riddy's also addressed her concerns that the focus on the senior leadership team is misguided, and that perhaps exec officers should be the ones held more to account.
Yes, I do believe that the representative, the executive team, is the medium between the university and the students. But if a particular campaigner or a particular student group feels that they have not been listened to or heard to, they have every right to hold their representatives to account. So perhaps it was, if there was a vote of no confidence against any of the representatives who they think have failed them, then that would still make sense, because they're holding somebody they've elected to account, versus holding a vice chancellor who has no role to play in their, who they have not elected, who widely represents not just the student but other stakeholders, the researchers or all the other stakeholders involved in the whole process. I just think it's taking it steps too far. That's my view.
I think me and Luce, we touched on that a minute ago, so I'm just going to go to you for this one, just in terms of time management. She picked up on there that maybe the exec officers should be held more to account. And relating to my last point, what do you think about that? Oh, no, Pippa's Wi-Fi is really not on our side today. For time, I'm going to move on to the final clip from Riddy. So in this next clip, she raises the question of whether a democratically elected uni management team would actually work.
I think it's very necessary. A democratically accountable management team is necessary, but I think it's far from reality. It's an ideal that all of us would like to reach, but it's not something that I see us reaching in the next couple of decades, because given how complicated and bureaucratic of an organization the university is, I just don't see a democratically responsible or accountable management team to students getting implemented, at least in the next decade.
I mean, just quickly, I'm going to go straight to you, Lucy. She said not for a couple of decades you can see democratically elected uni being elected. Quickly, in about 30 seconds, what do you think on that? I
mean, I think that's quite a defeatist attitude to take, given that we've seen such a monumental amount of change at the university this year alone. Students have single-handedly cut down the rent that they have to pay to university. So to take this attitude that we can't make any changes, we should give up because we're not even going to, we'll just fail, is incredibly defeatist. And I think we should completely I completely disagree with that stance. I think we can definitely push for change, and we should, and we will achieve this change, if it's what the students want.
Thanks, Lucy. Thanks for that. We're going to move on to the next segment of this programme now. MMG has also heard from Jess Edwards, who is the current part-time disabled student officers. Firstly, Jess has explained what her role involves.
So I am one of the disabled student part-time officers alongside Jazz, which means I was elected to my role. It's similar to the execs. We work quite closely with the execs, except our role is voluntary and we represent disabled students and their views and highlight issues that may come up, whether that's things that we face personally or things that people raise to us, and we campaign for change and awareness around those issues.
I'm going to go to the next clip because I don't think there's really much discussed there. She just explained her role, which is an amazing role at this university. But the Disabled campaign recently published an accessibility report on experiences of students. Jess now explains the findings.
It was mainly Jazz and some other people that did the report, but I do know about it. So it was just highlighting issues that disabled students have faced, mainly during the pandemic, but a lot of these issues have been long-standing and just haven't been addressed. So it's things like lectures being on Zoom where captions aren't available, where you could have it on Microsoft Teams where captions are available, which obviously excludes people that rely on captions, like those who are deaf or hard of hearing. People having transcripts which are improperly transcribed, which is a particular issue in technical subjects, and also things like screen readers not being able to pick up things on websites or online textbooks, which just makes them inaccessible. But there's a whole host of different elements to the report. It's very in-depth, and there's been a lot of really important contributions from students and their struggles. And yeah, we're just hoping that highlighting these issues will help to bring about change.
I mean, Jess picked up on some points there that, you know, you'd like to think sometimes we're just written standard practice in a lot of places, getting accessibility like that, especially in 2021. I mean, Lucy, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think it's sort of disheartening on an extreme level that, you know, disabled people are still facing these sort of barriers to learning. You know, when they're paying the same amount as us, they deserve all the same opportunities as us, and a lot of people are disabled people are a large proportion of the population that simply aren't, you know, accessing the same things as, you know, able people. And it is important to point out that one of the co-writers of that report is Jazz, who is running for women's officers. So it's nice to see that some of the SU candidates are taking a very active role in making life better for students.
Yeah, and you know, you also like to think that something like that will be dealt with by an institution as big as the University of Manchester.
Yeah, with the money that the Manchester's got as well, you'd hope. But hopefully that will make a change, and it's good to see this kind of stuff happening.
Speaking of those elections, though, Jess has actually shared her thoughts on some of the manifestos.
There has been quite a few people who've raised issues about how disabled students have been affected in the pandemic, which is something I did like to see. I like to see people acknowledging that. But also, I think there's been sort of a lack of information in certain areas that people have given. So one example I'd say is people who are talking about sustainability, which is obviously a really important issue, but not mentioning how that can impact disabled students, because in the sustainability movement, there tends to be a lot of eco-ableism. And say if someone was like, I want to ban plastic from the Students' Union, I want to ban single-use plastic, that obviously excludes disabled people who rely on that. And it's all well and good saying about things like sustainability, but you have to acknowledge how it's going to impact disabled people. And so I think with things like that, it's important to say that you're going to consult disabled students along the way and see how it's going to impact them, rather than presuming, because yeah, it's always best to just talk to someone about it, and there's always people available who are happy to talk about it.
Now, again, raising some great points there by Jess. But going to the next part, Liberation Access Officer is the executive role that usually works with disabled student officers and campaigners. Jess here discusses experiences working with the current Liberation and Access Officer.
I have never actually spoken to her. I sent her an email last year, but she didn't respond. I think people haven't really had much contact with her. From what I understand, she's on extended leave for health reasons, maybe. But yeah, I haven't had any contact with her. So the work we've done this year hasn't included her.
We'll discuss this in a minute, Lucy. We're just now going to hear what Jess hopes for how the future Liberation Access Officer will work with disabled students.
Yeah, obviously the Liberation Access Officer, like you said, it's a vital role, and it is one we're meant to work really closely with. So I think it would be important to work on accessible accommodation, because that is a really big issue that we've seen. Because obviously a lot of university halls aren't accessible. There are some that are accessible, but most of them aren't. And the ones that are accessible tend to be more expensive, which just puts more financial strain on disabled students, especially those who are working class or can't rely on financial means from their parents. And that's also a big issue with private rented accommodation. It's extremely hard to find accessible private rented accommodation. So I'd like to see them raise issues about that and try and work towards getting the university to provide more accessible accommodation. And also, I think it'd be really important to work on protecting student sex workers, because there was a survey in 2016 that showed that 55% of student sex workers are disabled. So it's something that really affects our community. And I think it's important to acknowledge that and also introduce safety initiatives. So obviously sex workers are highly penalised in many different aspects of life. So yeah, I'd like to see some work around that. And also continuing the work of the accessibility report that was produced, and acknowledging that and pushing for change from that. And just generally also being very intersectional in the work, because it's very hard to help one group of people without helping them all, because so many different identities intersect with one another. It's quite rare for someone to just be one thing. So yeah, I'd like to see collaboration in different areas.
Now, Lucy, a lot to pick up from that part. Some great points made by Jess there. I mean, just to start off with, she spoke about the absence that they felt from this year's current Liberation and Access Officer, and she said she was on extended leave for health reasons, maybe. So I think that's still a bit unknown about what's happened there. But it is a shame if societies do feel like they've been perhaps let down, or haven't been given those means of communication, which are extremely vital, probably now more than ever. Because I mean, we spoke yesterday on this program about societies, wanting to go on during COVID, but they can't get the members. And when people like this, they're more than just a society. They need that actual help. Sometimes they need the assistance to get up to the university level, the leadership level, so they can access that kind of support. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a great shame that Jess and the disabled, part-time officer feels so let down by the current Liberation and Access Officer, and hopefully, next year will be a bit easier for students, especially students in things like the Disabled Society, to be able to access and get talk to the SE officer, representing them, and it is crucial because disabled students need to have their voice heard, because it's only by listening to disabled students that we can understand the differences and the changes we need to make life easier for them. We can't just make that decision for people. We need to hear them. We need to have them represented in the university. And hopefully next year we've got some great candidates for Liberation Access Officer, so hopefully that will happen.
Yeah, and then obviously she picked up on some points about what she hopes for the future. What did you make of those?
I couldn't agree more. It's the the future's full of hope, and hopefully we can make some strides and make some changes to make life easier for all students, but specifically for disabled students.
Yeah, I think with every election comes, a new change if it's needed, and I think Jess clearly thinks that it's needed.
We've now got our final guest, our final interviewee, who is Will Jones, who's an international postgrad student who spoke to MMG, that's us, about why postgrads might be feeling slightly disconnected from university life and democracy. First up, Will spoke about his experience as an international student and as a postgrad who's not even been able to move to Manchester during the pandemic, and how this sort of disconnect might be felt by students who don't live in Manchester or even in the UK.
So yeah, I'm William Jones. I'm studying for an MSc in International Development at GDI at the University of Manchester. One of the big problems with postgraduates voting in the election, and it's something that I share, I started studying in October. I am yet to visit Manchester as a student. I've been to Manchester a grand total of 1 time in my life. I think that this is a common problem for postgraduates, and we have this very extreme disconnect from the life of a typical student at the University of Manchester, partially to do with COVID, partially to do with the nature of our courses.
I'll just bring on the next clip, because I think then we'll have more to discuss. So the next clip is Will sharing his sort of thoughts on the overall postgrad disconnect with university life, sort of pre-corona.
Part of it is, and I hate to say this, but our courses are just harder. Like, it's just a lot more intense. We have to spend a lot more time studying, a lot more time reading, a lot more time in awkward Zoom breakout rooms, I think, than most undergraduates. And just the nature of that is alienating of itself. I mean, at the best of times, being a postgraduate is alienating. But right now, when we can't blow off steam, we can't go outside with our friends, we can't go chat in a big group in the library, although people try to, it's just oftentimes not successful. We don't have that option. And it's really, really hard. I can't overstate it. It's very difficult.
It's quite sort of emotive from Will there. Obviously, you and I are both, home students. We're both undergrads, and we both live in Manchester, and we're both on the same course. So it might be difficult for us to sympathise with Will, but I do really feel for him and for other postgrads who must be having a very difficult time. It's such a difficult level of university to even take on, and then you have the added difficulty of not being able to see your academic advisor, not being able to see your tutors, not even being able to see your classmates, and not necessarily even being able to access the same level of resources that you would normally be able to access. So I guess, Tom, do you have anything to sort of say on that?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of mentioned the whole academic side of things, but for me, it was even just thinking about the whole cultural and societal side of things. Like he said, he's been to Manchester once in his life, and it's kind of that thing of in the future, it's like, oh, so where did you get your PG from? The University of Manchester. What's Manchester like? I've never been. And even just seeing the city and just understanding a different kind of life, which I think is so amazing, and it's even so amazing to see that Will has, still applied for his PG and still gone through with his application, despite the fact, obviously, when that would have been happening, this would have been picking up, with the hope of actually managing to get there. And I know a lot of students hope to get back in January, and that unfortunately still didn't happen.
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree more. It must be very, very difficult, the academic and the social aspect. So we'll move on to Will's next sort of clip. And this is about Will's thoughts on the very difficult situation that master's students and some postgrads are sort of experiencing, that they're only here for a year. So they're sort of less likely to engage in elections anyway, and probably feel even more alienated because this place are only here, they're only here for a year, and some of them aren't even here. So I suppose we'll have to hear what Will has to say.
I wanted to say that postgraduates as a group, we're just we're always marginalized. That's always the nature of it. There's just less of us. There always has been, but especially this year when there's no physical presence on campus, that certainly adds to the sort of marginalization. Us as master's students, we're only here for a year. We don't get to, if we do vote, we don't really get to sort of reap the benefits of the voting. it's a really strange situation because it's systematic. It's not just some of us leave. It's that we're all going to be gone in 6 months. We really just don't get to see that kind of thing.
Again, that's sort of another sort of aspect of the alienation, is that you can't even vote for the people that represent you unless you're there for more than a year. So again, I do feel for Will, and I do feel for postgrads, and how they probably don't feel represented necessarily by even the student union elections. And I don't know, Tom, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking there, just relaying back to the stats at the beginning of the programme, 11% of all postgrads have currently voted. So, it's a small amount, but even still, you think about postgrads, I'm just looking at the stats in front of me, then 17.8% of final years have voted. So final years make up 17.8% of all the votes that so far have been counted. So that's quite for being almost in a similar situation, unless you're deciding on doing a master's at the university, you're in a similar position there where you're not going to be here next year to see that exec move in. And it's I guess the whole idea of hoping that you are going to make that change for the next generation, because although you've been through it yourself, which is, sometimes really bad, you can at least hope that those behind you will have a better experience.
Yeah, and I think it adds quickly to sort of the sense of community that you get in Manchester. And even though you're not going to be here in the following year, you still care about the people who are sort of coming after you, which is not unique to Manchester, but it is lovely to see.
Yeah.
And I guess I'll move on to the sort of next clip from Will, where he discusses his thoughts on the postgrad candidate manifestos.
I read through all of them. I figured that before I do the interview on voting, I should probably vote myself. So I did that a couple hours ago. There wasn't anything that particularly stood out to me, if I'm honest. I think that there is a lot of emphasis on campus and Manchester specific issues, which of course makes sense, it being University of Manchester, but I cannot, and other postgrads I know cannot really relate to these problems in the same way. We don't have that connection. So certainly that would relate to having less voter turnout for people in our position.
Again, I think it's interesting that he voted despite not even, experiencing the results. And quickly, I notice Pippa's back, but I suppose we'll move on to a final discussion with all of us after this last clip, and then we can sort of sum up what we've seen. So in this last clip, Will discusses his hopes for flexibility with assessment, how he wants this to continue, and continued mental health support, which is crucial for postgrad students.
I think that there's a lot of emphasis, and a lot of things I've heard in the various group chats I've been is on flexibility. Is we want to be able to, we liked the changes that they added at the middle of exam season to add emergency extensions, because we think it's fair that we have access to that kind of thing if we do have problems. And I think more increases in that type of problem solving would be very helpful. Alongside that, we also obviously have huge mental health problems. I think that that period, especially around the few weeks surrounding exams, were some very, very dark times. In my group chats especially, it was very, very obvious that people were struggling. And I think that it's difficult. I am sympathetic for the university admin and the people that run these things, because it is an impossible task, because again, we're strewn across all the country and the world. I don't know how you're supposed to provide support and still have an intensive master's degree at the same time. But obviously some kind of empathy, some more reach out, that would be greatly appreciated.
So again, I think it's quite emotive to hear Will talk about this sort of, this mental health issue. We're going through a pandemic at the minute, but there's also a mental health pandemic that, so many people are suffering from, especially students. And from what I've heard, especially postgrads who feel, so alienated from the academic side of things and the social side of things, that he said it was an impossible task to kind of sort of deal with, to have an intensive master's program and look after your students. So I was wondering what you two thought about that. I suppose I'll come to Pippa first. And Pippa, if you want to talk about any other things you've heard, please do.
I'll just come on to that point. I think, it's good that some flexibility with assessments has been introduced, but I think, the pandemic has made things harder for everyone. It's not too difficult to introduce more measures if students feel that they need it. I think they should be listened to.
And Tom?
Yeah, literally just reciprocate what Pippa said. Basically, it is a shame that postgrad students feel like that, because if they feel like they've been left out more than any other, it's it's not fair. And he's right. There's such a short amount of time they spend here. You want to make the most of it, of what you can.
Yeah, I think I agree with you both. I think if postgrads really do feel this alienated, it's a shame that, as Will said, he didn't really identify with any of the candidates' manifestos, and I hope that whoever wins, we do have some very good candidates again, will be able to sort of take on postgrad problems and present them to university in a constructive way. And that was the last clip from Will, and I hope that we all found him constructive.
Yeah. And that is it from us, from our, I'd say, bumper edition of this programme, which has gone on now. We're nearly at 40 minutes. So thank you very much for tuning in and staying with us. It's a very big thank you, goodbye from me, Pippa and Lucy. Please don't forget, though, that you still have time to vote. That closes at 5 p.m. tonight. And then please do join us tomorrow from 6 p.m, where we'll be live with all the latest results and analysis from this year's elections. Goodbye.